I be Justin Barrett, president of Blueprint 1543, psychological scientist and former university professor. Today I want to talk about Halloween. It's a little ridiculous. But really, I had a request to talk about Halloween. How should Christians observe Halloween? Now, I want to be clear from the outset that I think this is a topic where lots of intelligent, good-hearted, sincere Christ followers can have differences of opinion. So I'm just offering my take on Halloween and how to celebrate. But it's easy to see why this is a topic on people's minds. It seems like Halloween has gotten kind of out of control when it comes to the amount of money that's spent on it. There's, of course, the whole candy and, tooth decay and diabetes in a bucket kind of thing. But these 40-foot tall inflatables and life-size animatronic types of things that people are spending money on, hasn't it gotten a little bit out of control, the whole Halloween thing? And what's an appropriate response to that? On top of that, setting aside the commercial sorts of issues, what about just the fact that Halloween seems to celebrate, the occult, witchcraft, wizardry, lots of just sort of evil and nasty stuff, violence, the worst of humanity, maybe. Is that what it's about? And really, should Christians have any part in celebrating that, if that's what it's about? After all, the Old Testament is repeatedly clear that God's people should not engage in witchcraft or attempts to conjure the dead, for instance. So does this mean that Christians should have nothing to do with Halloween? On maybe the other side of the ledger, I remember as a child growing up, going around trick-or-treating, going to those houses where there was clearly no celebration going on. There was no decoration, and no, they weren't handing out candy. And I remember thinking as a child, well, those aren't very nice people. Well, what's wrong with them? Because Halloween was such a cultural institution that if you were rejecting it, you were rejecting us too, as kids, as the trick-or-treaters, it felt like. As an adult, I can see where that's not necessarily the case, but it does communicate something. It communicates something to your neighbors. It communicates something to the children around. So what if it's the case that then that's the sort of most in-your-face end of October image of what it means to be a Christian is, we don't play that game. We don't give you candy, kids. We're not interested in your fun. There's a mismatch there. So it feels like there needs to be some kind of more nuanced Christian response than simply walking away from Halloween. Maybe. Again, I think people can disagree on this. But let's back up for just a moment and talk about, what is Halloween historically anyway? Halloween is an abbreviation of the term All Hallows Eve. All Hallows Eve has turned into Halloween, and it's the night before All Hallows Day, November 1st. And All Hallows Day is just another way of saying All Saints Day. All Saints Day is November 1st, All Souls Day, November 2nd. On All Saints Day, this was a Christian holiday in which Christians would celebrate deceased saints, known and unknown. So it was kind of just an all-purpose Saints Day. And then All Souls Day, the following day, was a day set aside to remember the dead and to pray for their souls. Now, there were some roots in Roman Catholic theology in particular about praying for souls that might be in purgatory so that they might go to heaven, to speed them along in their journey. And so then in the Protestant Reformation, with a rejection of many of those kinds of ideas from Roman Catholicism, we see a diminishing of All Saints and All Souls Day, but instead a pivot toward thinking of, instead of the souls needing to being our deceased sort of ancestors, our relatives who need a little bit of prayer to fuel their journey to heaven out of purgatory, they suddenly become evil spirits that should be avoided at all costs. So there's an interesting pivot. At least there's some historical reason to think that there's this pivot, in part due to the Protestant Reformation. Now, there's another ingredient in here that comes from Celtic cultures, and that was that the 1st of November is roughly a good marker for the start of winter. And that there would be celebrations and festival types of activities around the beginning of the season. And some of these were pagan kinds of celebrations invoking spirits and a little bit of divination, looking to the future, and ideas that somehow the spirit realm is a little bit closer to our realm on these special holidays at the beginnings of seasons. And so we can see in a lot of our current kinds of traditional Halloween practices like bobbing for apples and other sorts of things, echoes of these Celtic and Gaelic types of pagan practices. And it's for some of these reasons, that paganism coming in especially, that makes a lot of Christians today uneasy about Halloween. Even if Halloween was a Christian holiday, that sprinkling of pagan kinds of observances in there can make us a little bit uneasy. So the backbone of Halloween is actually Christian, and then there are some of these mixed in pagan kinds of influences. But I want to observe something. That's going to always be the case with holidays of various sorts. All of our holidays are going to be sprinkled in with other kinds of cultural elements from other kinds of traditional practices. There is no, say, Christian food that does not have some kind of continuity with foods in other places, and foods are a big part of holidays. There is no distinctively Christian clothing that isn't part of another cultural kind of setting. There's no specifically Christian language that isn't have some kind of overlap with the local language. And so the idea that somehow the mixing of one cultural thing with Christian stuff makes it a bad thing is not a path we can go down. Okay, we can't be complete separatists from all other kinds of cultural behaviors. Just an observation. Okay, so the backbone of Halloween is Christian, actually, but it has some of these pagan elements in there. And that can make especially Protestants very uncomfortable with the holiday. It seems to me then we have a few options of what to do about it. One strategy we could take is just embrace it. Get in there and celebrate Halloween. After all, it's part of our cultural setting. And maybe it's important for Christians to be in that space to show, hey, we can have a good time too. On the other side, though, we might think, well, but it's kind of gotten out of hand. It's not just that it's associated with death, but it's crept into associations with violence as well. So we see lots of celebrating, chasing people around with chainsaws and murder and mayhem as some of the themes that are part of Halloween now. Well, that's not just for reflecting on death. That's doing something different. It's not whimsical anymore, but dark and sinister. And then there is that commercial side that I alluded to already. It's not just a little bit of decorating to remind us of the dead, the recently deceased, but these 40-foot tall blow-ups and life-size animatronics and stuff. It looks like we're trying to shoot an episode of Scooby-Doo or something. And then it's not just handing out a little bit of candy or little trinkets for the kids, but, maybe giving them diabetes in a bowl they can dip into and, work on their childhood obesity. Those seem to be problems of sort of too enthusiastically embracing the holiday. So what's another option? Well, we could ignore it. We could pretend that it doesn't exist. And as I suggested, maybe there's some good reasons to do so. Even setting aside any pagan associations, it has become awfully consumeristic. It does promote unhealthy behaviors, unhealthy eating, unhealthy consumption, and maybe that is all too much, and we should take a big step backwards. I think the downside for Christians in completely distancing ourselves from it is that it could wreck our witness. And if you read the New Testament, especially the letters of the Apostle Paul, he was so concerned with damaging the gospel. And we might think here then that our witness to the gospel gets damaged by being, looking judgmental, looking anti-fun, being complete cultural separatists when we're supposed to be in the world but not of the world. If we completely withdraw, we're not in the world. Now, maybe that's a fair price to pay. Maybe what Halloween has become has gone too far and we need to withdraw. That's a judgment call. But I wonder, especially for children and the witness we are to children, that could be too high a price to pay, that kind of separatism. Just a thought. So that leads to the third option, which is to transform it. So we said, embrace it, ignore it. Third option, transform it. The good news of Jesus is that through the power of the Holy Spirit, we become transformed by the renewing of our minds, and our cultural forms can be renewed too as God's kingdom comes on earth as it is in heaven. So what are the options for transforming this part of culture. Well, there are a few options on the table. One is that, and you've probably seen these, some people turn Halloween into more of a seasonal harvest festival with pumpkins and ciders and hay rides and corn mazes and that sort of thing. All of the spooky stuff is pulled right out of it. And that can be a lot of fun. And maybe that's the right way to go. One of my concerns is that turning it entirely into a harvest festival, which is sort of an autumn festival, means it's really almost indistinguishable from American Thanksgiving, also a harvest festival that celebrates autumn and is decorated similarly. So what's the difference? And you seem to lose out on a lot of the fun parts, like, costumes and stuff and dressing up and that kind of pretend element of Halloween. Aren't we losing something if we just turn it into a harvest festival? Maybe, maybe not. Another move I've seen among Protestant Christians in particular is to emphasize Reformation Day. On October 31st, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of All Saints Church. See what he did there? But unless we're going to dress up like figures from the Reformation, Reformation Day hardly gives us much thematic material to go on for a festival-like celebration. At least for me, this feels more like a replacement of Halloween than a true transformation. Though I admit that one Halloween I did go trick-or-treating dressed as John Calvin. Maybe that's too much to share. More promisingly, I think we can rediscover and re-emphasize some traditional Christian themes in the holiday of Halloween. In some ways, we see these more traditional themes in movies like Disney's Coco, which is set around the Dia de los Muertos. Dia de los Muertos. Sorry, my accent's not so good. This is a festival-like Mexican version of Halloween that mixes in Roman Catholic ideas with some indigenous symbols like different kinds of flowers and so forth. The dead are remembered and prayed for. I see a lot of good in letting a day that spotlights death be an opportunity for remembering those who have died, being grateful for them, and using the day to re-examine our own mortality as a way to course correct how we would like to be remembered. October 31st, November 1st, and 2nd are great days to pray. A big part of transforming Halloween is to not take it too seriously. As a Christ follower, I don't like when Christmas and Easter are turned into cartoonish, commercialized celebrations of childhood. It trivializes these holy days. And so if Halloween's harshest critics are correct and Halloween is special to witches and wizards, and it's a serious day for the occult, and you want to show your disapproval, or you want to sap it of that power to show that spiritism and magic holds no power over God's people, then maybe an appropriate response really is to trivialize the day, to turn it into fun, to turn it into whimsy. Make it light instead of heavy and serious. Christians can give Halloween a certain power and mystique by taking it too seriously. What if we take that power away from it by letting it be fun? Letting Halloween be a chance to dress up, eat themed foods, be playful, enjoy a corn maze or a spooky story, carve a pumpkin, light some candles, have a themed dance party. Keep it light. In my house, we did set some kinds of boundaries around the dress up and some of the elements of celebration. For instance, we avoided costumes that suggested violence or aggression, costumes that might be too frightening for little kids because they're kind of gruesome, bloody, and gory and all of that stuff. And we avoided costumes that were associated with demons or devils. Why would we want to dress up like them? But I'm not afraid to dress up as a character from a Harry Potter book because it is make-believe after all, or from movies and other kinds of things, or dress as a cute animal or something, and maybe even a little spookiness. Spookiness is part of Halloween. And as a psychological scientist and a parent, I see value in creating these opportunities for children and ourselves to learn how to manage our fears and discomforts in safe ways. Creepy stories and images in safe and fun contexts can help us learn how to regulate our negative emotions like fear, like anxieties, certain kinds of stressors, so that they don't take root in us. We learn how to process those. We know that we can confront them and remain safe. What we don't do, at least in my house, is to spend too much money on Halloween, falling into the consumerism of it or overindulge the unhealthy eating. Of course, it's entirely possible to do some transforming, some re-Christianizing that transformation, and some trivializing of Halloween all at the same time. That's kind of what I'm talking about here and what I'm suggesting. Halloween can be a fun day to play with children and grandchildren and other adults, to have positive interactions with neighbors, and to recognize the realities of death without being overcome by them. But that's a topic I want to take up in my next episode. Until then, start working on your costume. Thanks for joining me. Like, subscribe, and as always, send comments and suggestions of what topics you'd like to hear about. Thanks.
Alas, my children, this is the day you shall always remember as the day that you almost... Captain Jack Sparrow.